Is Belisarius Cawl a Mary Sue? No. If you think so, then you either don't know what the words mean, or its meaning has degraded to the point of it being redundant. If you are capable of inserting yourself into the insectoid legs and steel hooves of Belisarius Cawl, then you should probably see your general practitioner. Or maybe a shaman. No, Cawl is not a Mary Sue, at least he isn't to my pedantic definition. The question you should be asking is whether he's a lazily written plot device. The answer to this is yes. Let's get into the bones of why. Cawl has been introduced to perform a number of functions within the narrative of modern 40k. Going chronologically, he was firstly used to introduce an actual character to the modern Mechanicus. Now, the Scions of Mars have plenty of characters, a number of them very interesting ones. Unfortunately, most of them died or turned traitor during the Horus Heresy, or disappeared soon after. The 40k era AdMech needed some vessel for a little humanity, or whatever constitutes for such in the Machine Men. Now, to make him the only character for the AdMech that would have a model and thus get the spotlight, they had to make him someone important. Now, initially when designing the model, they had the idea to make him the Fabricator General of Mars. If you don't know, Fabricator Generals are the guys in charge of Forge Worlds, and the one of Mars is the de facto leader of the entire Mechanicus, having a seat on the High Lord of Terror, and probably having the most independently maneuverable power of any of them. That is to say, the Fabricator General of Mars would have been one of the most powerful mortals in the galaxy. The reasoning they claim to have decided against this was them imagining the current Fabricator General to be the size of a building, an idea which was codified within the Dark Imperium novel. I'm glad they decided against this because the Fabricator General of Mars should be a political power first and foremost. He should never go gallivanting off to fight on the front lines, he's way too important for that. However, that meant the only real meaningful title they could give him was out. So, he's just an Archmagos. That meant they had to come up with a reason for this particular Archmagos among the innumerable Archmagi out there to be so important. They went with making him old. 10,000 years old. This was their first mistake. See, GW is really bad at understanding scale, but 10,000 years is a very long time. Now, the reason Space Marines and Primarchs can get away with this kind of shit is because they have biological immortality, which is fair. Chaos gets warp fuckery, both through mutation and time distortion, as well as most of them who matter having started off as the Starties anyway. Eldar get being aliens, thus ridiculous lifespans. Necrons are Necrons, we don't worry about the Orcs. The Emperor gets a free pass, for obvious reasons. For anybody else though, you best have a damn good excuse for how they survived for 10,000 years. Cawl had AdMech cybernetics? That's it. He just cybernetics'd the problems away. For 10,000 years. Don't worry about how he has a clearly organic face and arm, they were fine. For 10,000 years. Rejuvenat is one hell of a drug, eh? Him surviving for 10,000 years was not sufficiently justified. This goes against some of the coolest 40k RPG lore and life extension that went into some of the grisly and inhumane means those of power in the Imperium would go to eke out those extra years. Now none of that matters, the AdMech can just ignore all of it. That is the worst kind of bad writing. Not only is it lazy in Cawl's case, but it also weakens the setting as a whole. It was terrible and lame and I hate it. They could have done something interesting with it, making him a brain in a jar at the top of that Iron Centaur slug. They could have said he was in stasis for a chunk of this time, showing some sacrifice for a patch of history and giving some thematic links to Gulliman. They didn't do that, he's just 10,000 years old and has no problems, but a bit of a muddled mind to show for the time. That's over 100 normal lifespans with no meaningful price. That's terrible. The one good thing about his ridiculous age is that it goes to justify some of his upcoming bullshit. If he has had 10,000 years, then it almost justifies him having roughly but not quite figured out the Cadian pylons, it's probably enough time to figure out how to do half the job of bringing Gulliman back from his near-death state. It might even be enough time to figure out the Primaris Marines and some of their new toys, but we'll get to them later. I'm willing to accept that he could have figured all of this out in 10,000 years. I just think it's stupid that he has. See, making it all so this was done by Cawl is a tremendous waste of opportunity. It's the kind of thing that needlessly shrinks the setting and makes the AdMech in particular look like a joke. In the 200 years of plot since the start of the Gathering Storm, Cawl has come along and unveiled enough nonsense to put every other tech priest in all of 40k canon to shame. Now, I get that they wanted to show off their new character, and as said, he's gonna get the focus because he has the model, but making it all him was just way too far. When reading the new fluff, every problem that comes up, they just apply Cawl as the solution. He's a walking utility belt, a living MacGuffin that explains away every obstacle to GW's rushed and poorly written plot advancement and new goofy line of models. It's bad. Alright, let's get to the Primaris Marines, Cawl's biggest sin perhaps. Now, we're not going to talk about the problems with the Primaris themselves, we're sticking to Cawl's issues as relates. The Primaris Marines act to most egregiously highlight Cawl's usage as a lazy plot device. How do we explain a massive army fully equipped with unique armor, weapons and vehicles coming out of nowhere? Cawl did it. All of it. He came up with the genetic modifications, he invented the new armor, he made the new guns, he designed the new tanks, he did everything. The Primaris Marines and Ultima Fanning were a one-man job. Cawl did it all, or at least Cawl did every part worth mentioning, every organ, knife, grav system, he did it all. Don't worry about how he got the resources for it, or how he hid this from the rest of the Mechanicus for 10,000 years, because make no mistake, any orthodox mind in the AdMech would want Cawl lynched for his work on the Primaris. They tried to account for how he was able to upgrade the Space Marines genetically by stating that he was involved with the original work to create the Space Marines along with the Emperor. Now, that could have been an interesting plot point. After all, it means this guy personally knew Big E, but it also means that he must have been a little bit important even back then. If so, then that makes it all the more conspicuous that he was never mentioned before. Just why the hell wasn't this guy who helped make the Space Marines and was personally trusted by Rabute Gulliman ever mentioned during the Horus Heresy or the preceding 10,000 years? Well, it's because they made him up after they were at the 41st millennium and tried to awkwardly stitch him into the timeline. How much of a crappy job they did of it is plain to see. I want to conclude my criticism by mentioning a quote that all 40k fans should know. It's a line from the foreword to most all 40k books. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. This is a line that is core to the very premise of Warhammer 40k, and the character and deeds of Belisarius Cawl spit upon it. But here's the thing, I don't hate Belisarius Cawl. I don't hate the character or even what he represents. In fact, I almost like Cawl. The execution of writing his character has been terrible. I certainly hate that, but it could have been good. It wouldn't even take that much shifting to fix most of his problems, and though the start has been bad, I do see something there. You may think I'm talking crazy, but let me justify myself. During the Gathering Storm, GW released a video starring Cawl that takes place just after Cadia got popped. Here is the first line.
I have failed, but work proceeds apace. I, Belisarius Cawl, have failed, Cadia.
That right there contained more emotional content than the entirety of the rest of the Gathering Storm put together. That was real pathos. In fact, this video, the Rise of the Primarch cinematic trailer, actually has a lot of it. Massive credit to the voice actor, artist, and audio and visual editors involved in it. And though it was thanks to those people, the voice actor especially, that the emotion came through there, the whole thing really does speak to a potential for the character. You see, Belisarius Cawl is a character that could be the centre and linchpin for some really intriguing conflicts in the 40k setting. Now, I don't mean the Abaddon blowing up Cadia or Gulliman launching the Indomitus Crusade sort of conflict. No, I mean some properly interesting conflicts. Not only the kind of deep and complex political and theological conflicts that only 40k could bear, but also the kind of personal and internal conflicts that 40k so often lacks. Let me give some examples. On the political and theological side of things, the obvious conflict is one within the power structures of the Adeptus Mechanicus. All of the issues with his introduction into the setting could be so easily reframed as points of tension for the rest of the Mechanicus. After all, from the audience perspective, this guy has been basically unheard of for the past 10 millennia. What if that was explored from the point of view of the modern Admech priesthood, who may have almost totally forgotten him before he took center stage at most major galactic events? How are the followers of the machine cult reacting to this half-remembered apparent legend from times long forgotten returning to prominence? How are the Martian Synod reacting to his more questionable deeds of innovation? How is the Fabricator General of Mars reacting to what is practically an upstart competitor to his authority and even his title? From this, you could bring about a split in the entire body of the Mechanicus, pitting those more orthodox, conservative, and cautious of its members against those more radical and innovatively minded. Considering how tense internal Mechanicus disagreements of belief can get, it's easy to see how this could put some Forge Worlds into states of near open war over the debate. This would even go towards helping alleviate the problem of everything being done by Cawl alone, since you can bring in elements of the Admech loyal to him, from those who agree with his doctrines and actions, to those who are directly working with and under him. Name it the Cawlian Schism and bam, you've got the makings of fluffy gold. But more important than that is the emotional, human side of things. Cawl, as he has been presented so far, is something that many feel doesn't quite fit the grimdark hopelessness of a lot of 40k, but that doesn't have to be a detriment. Consider that Cawl is the sort of confident, visionary genius that has the mind to actively go about trying to fix the ills he perceives in the Imperium in his own way, and is also in the incredibly rare position of being able to act on that will. That kind of character-driven story within 40k has a ridiculous amount of potential, from explorations of questions of ego and hubris that one could ask of history's great dictators and all who have aspired to be as such, to ones of lengths to which any man must go to achieve something truly worthwhile. Within that could be weaved in themes of the borders of humanity, as ties into a wider theme of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the dangers imposed by going against authority, and how, though corrupt and strict, the often valid and understandable reasoning for the restrictions exist, and even discussions of what it's like to be a sentient entity so ancient and physically inhuman, to be thus so removed, both in nature and time, from any sort of equal, both in form and in the very way of thinking. I'm glad to say that the Dark Imperium book touched just a little on some things like I'm describing. It brought up some of Cawl's creations being flagrantly heretical by the laws of the machine cult, how he wants to replace the fabricator general of Mars, and that Gulliman knows the danger he poses if he goes unchecked. It didn't go into much depth at all, but by scraping the top of the iceberg, it did enough to make me hope that some of the writers may realize at least a little of the wealth of interesting and even artistic work that could be based on the character. Belisarius Cawl has the potential to be the foundation for the kind of intricate stories that take advantage of 40k's greatest strengths, and so too some truly human stories that help create a strong emotional connection that years of varying quality, effort and motive of writing have left the universe of the 41st millennium all too often lacking. His introduction to the setting was sloppy and used to perform some disgustingly lazy writing, but with enough effort and tact, he could, just maybe, become one of the most interesting and perhaps even beloved characters within the setting. Now, I don't expect that, but, you know, it could happen. It's highly unlikely, but possible. So, at least there's that. If you liked this video, feel free to press the like button, and if you want to see more videos like this, then I hope you'll consider subscribing. I'd like to end this video on a question. What if, instead of this model being representative of the new original character of Belisarius Cawl, they had made it the pre-established character Arkan Land? Long missing but returned at last from hiding, 10,000 years later at the Imperium's darkest hour. Just something to consider. Thanks for watching.